the program, someone was supposed to speak, and then we were supposed to respond to that speaker as discussants. So today I've acquired a new definition of a discussant. It's synonymous with a presenter. I think the perils of speaking after someone, especially on the same subject, is the tendency to sound like a broken record and repeat things. I'm going to avoid that as much as possible. But if you hear me repeating what Susan has just spoken about, please alert me and I will stop doing that. Let me start by talking about something that we spoke about before we broke for tea. I think I want to preface my presentation with my contribution, my 2 cents in that discussion. Do we need people do we need journalists to be trained, to be knowledgeable, to be experts? I think the answer is yes. The problem that we have in this country, I want to speak as a journalist. I think I still fancy myself as a journalist. The problem that I have experienced in journalism in this country, especially as an editor since 2004, is that our training institutions churn out generalists and not experts. I say so because I've seen what is happening at other training institutions throughout the world, not even in the developed world, but even in Africa, where after your diploma in journalism or your degree in media studies or your degree in journalism, it's good to acquire certain skills that will help you to become an expert in your field. So if you go to WITS, where they train media studies students and journalists as well, they've got WITS Business School, which certifies guys who want to be business reporters. So after your diploma, your degree, you can then go and do 6 months, 8 months, learning business. And they give you a post-grad diploma, and you become an authority in business reporting. You are much better off than someone who has just walked out of NAST with textbook knowledge. Our universities in this country can easily do that. It's not rocket science, but it requires organizational aptitude. And the reason why the business models in this country for media are not sustainable is partly because the skills base that we have in this country with regards to the actual execution of journalism is very, very thin. We have got lots of practitioners, but the skills levels are thin. Hence, you will find in a number of media houses, including where I come from, we are making a deliberate, we have a deliberate strategy to look at people who possess those extras. They will come in and they will offer more than the guy they are sitting next to, who has gone to NAST, who has gone to the University of Zimbabwe, who has gone to MSU and come out with a diploma, with a degree, but no area of speciality. It's the same thing with media managers that we have in this country. We were trained to be journalists, that's it. We were never trained to be managers. And we have done nothing about training ourselves to manage the personnel that we have in our newsrooms, to manage our budgets, to manage numbers, and to manage processes. So when you look at the models that we have adopted in this country to run media organizations, especially in print, they are very, very 1970s or 1980s models. We are struggling to move away from those models because we are very, very defensive in terms of what we know. What we know is what we will do If there are new people who come in with new ideas, we don't like them in our organizations. We tend to push them aside because they are a hindrance to the little knowledge that we have, or they will expose the little knowledge that we have. What I'm saying is that it's no longer business as usual. If you look at, for a long time, the models that we have been employing, they have got this basic assumption that the business of newspapers, I'm going to speak more about print and newspapers because Susan has touched well on broadcasting. But we have got this assumption that the business of print is always going to run on the back of good advertising that we have in the newspapers. And the advertising that we have always had in the newspapers has been something like a subsidy to journalism. In other words, this is what is paid for reporters. So for a long time we have had newspapers representing the front line of journalism, and in some instances with very, very deep benches of talent. I'm sure my brother Chris will testify to this. I worked sometime when I was a little boy in an institution that had talent, where we had people like Sansli Chamnorwa, like Koma Banks, Barnabas Donlana, like Basil Donteta, Cyril Zenda, my brother JB. There was talent. And this was a team of 6 people running the Zimbabwe Independent in the 90s. It was just 6 of us producing a paper every day, but there was talent. Look at the newspapers today. We have much more people in the newspapers. The reason we have more people than the small newsrooms that we had in the 90s is because we are making up for the deposit of talent. I'll say this without exception, that the little talent that we have, we are now making up that with numbers. We throw in another body to do what 2 people could do. That 1 person will do. We have 3 people now doing the same job. So what used to fund good journalism in the past, that journalism that I'm talking about, was print advertising revenue. But here is the tragedy. In Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Zambia, in Malawi, everywhere in the world. The tragedy is that the advertising revenue is falling off the cliff. Last year, 2 years ago, I went to the World Association of Newspapers conference, and these are the numbers they threw on the table. They said since 2000, since the year 2000, more than $45 billion worth of advertising revenue has disappeared from print media. This is in Europe and the United States alone. Africa and Asia are not a factor in this. So you can throw in another $20 billion and easily you can cross the $60, $70 billion mark. This is just revenue that has disappeared. Now the disappearance of that revenue also meant the disappearance of certain skills that were in journalism or certain investments that were being done to keep people in journalism. But the good news is we are in what we call the golden age of journalism at the moment. The golden age of journalism is saying that there are a lot more people wanting to read content. Readers are being well served, and news reading has never been more popular. But here is the dichotomy. If news reading, if people are reading the news, why are media organizations struggling? The answer is very, very simple. That golden age that we are talking about does not necessarily translate into a golden age for the writers. It's a golden age for the consumer, but it's not a golden age for the producer. Why? Because there are millions of producers who are prepared to do this job for free. Unfortunately, when we were younger, we were authorities. People would call us to ask us things. People would call me to say, by the way, who is the Minister of Local Government? And we'll tell them, I was an authority. This was the pre-Google, pre-Yahoo era. We were authorities, we knew everything. I even, you know, we had a telephone book where we wrote in the book Rema Source. I knew like 300 numbers from the top of my head without referring. I knew every minister's number. But these days, I don't, because it's not necessary. I can store the information and or Google it up. So the tragedy that we are having now with the business modeling, especially in the print sector, is that we are still stuck with this model that says print is gonna bring in the cheese. And from the print, and the cheese is going to come from advertising revenue. And when we have advertising revenue, we are going to invest in training print reporters. And those print reporters are going to write good stories. And those good stories are going to sell newspapers. And then from the good sales of newspapers, we'll get money from the street. And the business will continue. That's a lie. That will never happen. That is not going to happen. And we are seeing the failure of that model in newspapers closing down. With all due respect to my brothers at the Mail, and I can also speak about Southern Eye, which is under the stable that I live. This was the assumption. It was a wrong assumption. It didn't work. We made mistakes. We closed newspapers. So what failed? It's advertising revenue. When advertising revenue fails, what will fail? It's journalism also fails. And if journalism fails, what also fails? It's street sales. And you have no revenue base, and you close business. So I think going forward, what I'm going to profile are very, very simple ideas about how to move away from the era that we are in. I'm battling to move away from this as a media leader, as an editor, and as someone who is spending a lot of time reading about business modeling and about business models. The first thing that we have to talk about are jobs. It's something called jobs. The jobs that supported traditional media are no longer required today. So you can staff your media house with traditional jobs. One day you are going to find a way of cleaning those jobs. And some of the process of cleaning those jobs, cleaning out those jobs are going to be very, very costly. So what do we need to do? We no longer need to hire the traditional journalists. We don't need them. If you are one of them, start doing something about it. Because you'll be out of the job market very soon. Especially where I work, I no longer need them. So if you come and I see that you are a traditional journalist, it doesn't matter what people say about you. Thank you. I've said the skills that we had in the past are no longer required. What we require are specialists. I want you to go and read about BuzzFeed. And you can also go and Google Forbes magazine. What their business model says. Just go and Google those guys who are interested in ensuring that print survives. What they now think about. What are we talking about? I will just give you the headlines here. We need new skills, or we need journalists with skills, certain skills. Now, let me talk about where I come from. Right, we have got a reporter called Veneranda Lang. We got her from Parliament when we started Newsday. She had done media studies, but they'd never worked as a journalist. And people were saying, we need experienced journalists. But we got her in. Why did we bring her in? She is knowledgeable about Parliament and parliamentary processes and everything Parliament. She knows that. No one can train her about